Have you ever found yourself lying awake at 3 in the morning, the house completely still, and suddenly it hits you? That silent, late-night fear of death. It creeps in when we're most vulnerable, often arriving hand in hand with the heavy grief of losing loved ones. It is a profoundly isolating feeling.
Trying to navigate that sharp ache while living in a fast-paced, rational, modern American culture. We live in a society that expects us to just clock in on Monday morning, focus on our productivity, and demand hard empirical evidence for every single thing we believe in. In an environment so relentlessly focused on the material world, the existential dread that often haunts us can feel almost impossible to escape.
Welcome to The Last Read, books for your ears, wisdom for your life. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast right now. You truly do not want to miss the journey we are embarking on today.
Today, we are going to explore a mind-bending true story that bridges the impossible gap between hard medical science and the spiritual realm. We are diving into Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife by Dr. Eben Alexander.
It is a narrative that speaks directly to anyone who has ever wrestled with the ultimate unknown, offering profound insights into life after death, providing comfort for our fear of death, and shining a light through that very real existential dread. But we won't give away all the secrets just yet. Before a person can accept the truly impossible, they usually demand proof. Up next, we'll explore the life of Dr. Alexander before his extraordinary experience, taking a closer look at the deeply skeptical, data-driven academic neurosurgeon he once was, before a sudden illness forced his highly trained brain to shut down and his spirit to finally open.
We are now entering the core of today's episode, the very heartbeat of a story that challenges everything we think we know about reality. The premise of Proof of Heaven is as simple as it is terrifying. What happens when a man who has spent his entire professional life studying the physical brain, a man who firmly believes that our consciousness is nothing more than a biological byproduct, suddenly experiences the total shutdown of his own mind?
Dr. Eben Alexander was the ultimate man of science. He was someone who would have politely, but firmly, told you that the soul, the spirit, and the afterlife were just comforting illusions, mere tricks played by the chemistry of a dying brain. He subscribed entirely to strict scientific materialism.
The deeply ingrained belief that the physical world, the stuff we can measure and touch, is all there is. To him, human beings were just highly complex biological machines. When the brain shuts down, the lights simply go out. But then, for Dr. Alexander, the lights didn't go out. Without spoiling the truly profound discoveries he makes on the other side of the veil just yet, let's just say his journey forces that rigid scientific materialism to completely collapse. It is forced to confront the unexplainable mysteries of human consciousness. He ultimately comes to a radical, universe-shifting realization that the brain itself does not actually produce consciousness. Instead, it acts more like a filter, a reducing valve that shifts a much larger, eternal consciousness down into a limited capacity for our mortal lives.
It is a beautiful, mind-expanding concept, one that makes this book podcast so deeply compelling for anyone interested in true spirituality and the very real search for the proof of heaven. And just a quick reminder as we navigate this journey together, the link of the hard book is at the description.
But to truly appreciate the sheer magnitude of his spiritual transformation, we first need to understand the mind of the skeptic. We need to step into the world of the prestigious Ivy League academic who demanded hard empirical data for absolutely everything, right up until the moment a rare, incredibly aggressive illness hijacked his body and changed his universe forever.
To truly grasp the weight of this story, we have to look closely at who Dr. Eben Alexander was before November of 2008. He wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a mystic or a theologian. He was a highly respected, deeply pragmatic academic neurosurgeon. We are talking about a man with a resume that commands absolute respect, spending 15 years teaching at Harvard Medical School and operating at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. For over 2 decades, he spent his days inside the operating room, literally holding the human brain in his hands. And because of that, his worldview was incredibly strict. It was rooted purely in scientific materialism.
If you had walked up to Dr. Alexander before his illness and asked him about near-death experiences or the concept of an eternal soul, his skepticism would have been absolute. He would have likely given you a polite, clinical smile. To him and to the medical establishment he represented, the brain was simply a biological machine. It produced consciousness the exact same way a Ford V8 engine produces horsepower or a power plant generates electricity. In his mind, all our thoughts, our deep loves, our fears, our very sense of self were just the result of physical chemistry, sparks of electricity jumping between synapses. When the physical brain dies, or when it shuts down, the consciousness stops, period. It's like pulling the plug on a television set. The screen just goes black.
But then, the unthinkable happened. In the early morning hours, Dr. Alexander was struck by an excruciating pain in his back and head. It wasn't just a severe flu. It was an extraordinarily rare, spontaneous case of E. coli bacterial meningitis. This wasn't a mild infection. The bacteria was aggressively attacking his brain. Specifically, it was completely shutting down his neocortex. Now, in modern medical terms, the neocortex is the holy grail of what makes us human. It is the outer surface of the brain responsible for all conscious thought, memory, language, and sensory perception. Without it functioning, you literally cannot experience anything.
Within hours, he was pushed into a deep coma. His colleagues, doctors at the very hospital where he used to work, put him on a ventilator. They gave him practically zero chance of a meaningful recovery. His brain was, for all medical intents and purposes, completely offline. But right before he slipped into that coma, right at the threshold where his established materialistic paradigm completely failed him, this staunch man of science shouted 3 crystal-clear words in the emergency room: "God, help me."
For 7 days, his body lay in a vegetative state. The medical monitors showed no higher brain activity. The machine was turned off. And yet, while his physical brain was being ravaged by bacteria and medically incapable of producing a single thought, Dr. Alexander's consciousness did not go dark. Instead, he was experiencing an ultra-real, vibrant journey into another dimension, a reality so profoundly complex and beautiful that it made his everyday American life feel like a faded dream. His transformation from a man who believed we are nothing but walking bags of chemicals to a man who experienced the divine firsthand is the absolute bedrock of this narrative.
But how was that even biologically possible? If the neocortex is completely shut down, how can a person experience something more real than the room they are sitting in? Well, to understand that, we have to completely flip our understanding of the human mind upside down. We have to stop looking at the brain as a factory that actually makes consciousness and start looking at it as something else entirely. What if your brain is actually just a filter, a kind of reducing valve, blocking out the vastness of the universe just so we can get through our daily lives? We are going to dive into that exact mind-bending concept next.
So, let's really unpack that idea for a moment. Because if you are anything like Dr. Alexander before his coma, you were probably taught what we call the production model of consciousness. In the production model, the brain is basically a biological factory. It's an engine. Think of it like a classic American muscle car. Just like a heavy V8 engine burns gasoline to create horsepower, our physical brain burns glucose and fires off billions of synapses to create you. Your thoughts, your memories, your deep love for your family. According to this model, all of it is manufactured right there inside the dark cavern of your skull. And the logic follows naturally. When the engine breaks down, the horsepower stops. When the brain shuts off, the consciousness simply disappears. It's a very logical, practical, and frankly, widely accepted scientific view.
But Dr. Alexander's miraculous experience in the ICU shattered that engine analogy into 1,000,000 pieces. Instead of the brain acting as a producer of thought,
he realized it actually functions as a filter, a kind of biological reducing valve. This isn't a brand new concept. Pioneers of American psychology, like Harvard's William James, and thinkers like Aldous Huxley, have hinted at this exact phenomenon. The filter theory proposes that primordial, universal consciousness is already everywhere. It is the very foundation, the core fabric of the universe. But if you were constantly tuned in to that infinite reality, you wouldn't be able to function. Imagine trying to navigate a chaotic morning commute on a packed interstate, or trying to remember your grocery list at the supermarket, or sitting down at the kitchen table to file your taxes, while simultaneously experiencing the boundless, interconnected, multi-dimensional love of the entire cosmos. You'd be completely paralyzed. You wouldn't be able to survive as a physical being.
So, the human brain acts as a heavily fortified shield. It takes a massive, roaring waterfall of universal consciousness and filters it down, dripping out just a tiny, manageable trickle. Just enough sensory information, memory, and ego for you to pay your mortgage, protect your physical body, and get through a normal Tuesday. Our brains do not generate our awareness, they limit it. They intentionally lock us into the familiar, narrow dimensions of space and time.
And that is exactly why Dr. Alexander's near-death experience was so staggeringly vivid. When the severe bacterial infection effectively unplugged his neocortex, it didn't turn off his consciousness. It removed the filter. Suddenly, that biological reducing valve was blown wide open. The everyday limitations of his mortal mind were stripped away, and he was finally free to experience the vast, non-physical reality that is always hovering just out of sight.
But crossing over into that unfiltered reality is not an instant magical ticket to the pearly gates. In fact, when the human brain fully shuts down and the ego is completely stripped away, the very first stage of that journey can be incredibly disorienting. Before Dr. Alexander ascended into the radiant light and boundless love he describes in the book, he first had to pass through a dark, primitive, almost mechanical state of existence, a place where human language, personal identity, and memory simply did not exist, a murky realm he came to call the Earthworm's eye view. We are going to explore that dark, frightening, but absolutely essential first step of his journey into the afterlife, coming up next.
So, picture waking up in a place where you have absolutely zero memory of who you are. No name, no career, no family, no language. You don't even know what a human being is. That is exactly where Dr. Eben Alexander found himself when his neocortex completely shut down. He didn't float out of his physical body and immediately see the pearly gates or hear a choir of angels. Instead, he found himself in a place he later named the realm of the Earthworm's eye view.
It was dark, it was murky, almost like being buried deep underground. He described seeing what looked like roots, or maybe blood vessels, glowing dimly in the muck around him. He heard a continuous, dull, mechanical pounding rhythm, and occasionally he saw grotesque, primitive animal faces bubbling up out of the mud, groaning. It sounds like something straight out of a psychological horror movie, right? Or maybe a dark, twisted funhouse ride. But the most fascinating part of all this? He wasn't terrified.
In the book, he writes, "I had come from nowhere and had no history, so I fully accepted my circumstances, even the initial murk and mess of the realm of the Earthworm's eye view, with equanimity." This touches on a deeply profound concept, ego death. Here in the United States, our entire culture is built around personal identity and achievement. We are what we do, what we buy, where we live. You might be a lawyer from Chicago or a teacher from Ohio. You're a parent, a voter, a die-hard sports fan. Our ego is our primary anchor in this physical world. But Dr. Alexander experienced a complete, total stripping away of that earthly ego. Without it, there was no fear of losing his identity, because there was simply no identity left to lose. He was just raw, naked awareness.
This murky, primitive state represents the foundational, unfiltered, raw reality of existence. When you completely strip away the human brain's processing power, the language centers, the memories, the complex emotional attachments, you are left with just the absolute core spark of consciousness. From our everyday perspective, that sounds terrifying.
The idea of losing everything that makes you you. But Dr. Alexander's journey suggests that letting go of the ego is a completely necessary first step. It's almost like clearing a computer's hard drive, wiping the slate totally clean, so that you can actually process the massive, infinite reality that comes next. You simply can't pour the entire ocean into a teacup, so the teacup has to be shattered.
And that shattering, that total release of his earthly identity in the dark mud, is exactly what prepared him for the next monumental stage of his journey. Because just as he was getting used to the murky, mechanical rhythm of the earthworm's eye view, something shifted. A single speck of brilliant white gold light pierced the darkness. And with that light came a melody, a spinning, beautiful sound that began to pull him up and out of the mud into a vibrant, hyper-real landscape. We are going to follow him through that glowing portal and step into one of the most breathtaking, profound encounters of his entire experience next.
So, Dr. Alexander is pulled from that dark, primitive mud, drawn upward by a single speck of brilliant white gold light. And as he moves toward it, he hears a sound, a spinning, incredibly beautiful melody that feels completely alive. It acts almost like a tear in the fabric of that dark realm, a glowing portal that he passes straight through. And what he steps into on the other side is an absolute sensory explosion. In the book, he refers to this place as the gateway. It was a world that felt more real, more vivid than anything we experience here on Earth. He describes lush green valleys, sparkling waterfalls, people and children dancing and playing below, and everywhere, a massive undulating sea of vibrant butterflies.
But he wasn't alone. As he took in this breathtaking, hyper-real landscape, he realized he had a companion, a beautiful young woman with deep blue eyes and golden brown hair, wearing simple peasant clothing. She was riding right alongside him on the wing of a butterfly.
Now, she didn't speak to him with her voice. She didn't have to. The communication was entirely telepathic, instantaneous, flowing directly into his absolute core. And the message she gave him is arguably the most famous and certainly the most moving takeaway from the entire book. She told him 3 things. You are loved and cherished dearly forever. You have nothing to fear. There is nothing you can do wrong. Just let those words sit with you for a second. You are loved, you have nothing to fear, there is nothing you can do wrong.
When you think about the society we live in right now, especially here in the US, those 3 sentences are the exact opposite of how most of us operate day to day. We live in a culture of constant hustle and relentless judgment. We are terrified of making a mistake, of picking the wrong career path, saying the wrong thing, failing our kids, or falling behind our peers. We constantly measure our worth by our productivity, our bank accounts, or the curated perfection of our social media feeds. We walk around carrying this heavy, invisible backpack of anxiety, convinced that we are always just one misstep away from disaster.
But in the gateway, Dr. Alexander was stripped of all that earthly baggage. He was handed a truth that completely shattered the human illusion of unworthiness. The message wasn't that our actions here on earth don't matter. It was that our fundamental soul, the true, enduring essence of who we are, is entirely safe. It is wrapped in an unconditional love that is so profound, it's almost impossible for our heavily conditioned earthly brains to comprehend. Imagine the deep physical relief of actually believing that, of waking up every morning knowing that no matter what happens, you are eternally cherished. It is a moment of profound comfort that Dr. Alexander offers to all of us, a gentle reminder to drop the heavy armor we wear every single day. But as beautiful and life-changing as that message was, it was really just an introduction. That spinning melody and the beautiful guide on the butterfly wing were preparing him for his ultimate destination. Because that feeling of unconditional love, he was about to discover that it wasn't just a comforting emotion, it was the actual literal energy source of the entire universe. And that brings us to the very center of his journey. So, as he moves past the gateway, accompanied by that spinning melody, Dr. Alexander enters what he calls the core, and this is the ultimate destination of his near-death journey. He describes the core as an unending, inky blackness, but it wasn't scary or empty, quite the opposite. It was a comforting void, overflowing with the infinite, healing presence of a divine source. In the book, he struggles to find the right word for this presence. He notes that the word God felt almost too puny, a human word carrying way too much earthly baggage to describe the sheer majesty of what he was experiencing. Instead, he originally referred to this divine source as because of the profound sound that resonated throughout that realm, echoing through infinity and eternity. And it was here, in the core, that Dr. Alexander grasped a truth that completely upended his materialist worldview. He realized that love, that same unconditional love he felt in the gateway, is not just some fleeting human emotion. It's not just a biological trick or a chemical reaction in our brains meant to help our ancestors survive.
No. In the core, he understood that love is the actual fundamental binding fabric of the universe. It is the physical and spiritual infrastructure of everything. Just as physicists talk about gravity holding planets in orbit, Dr. Alexander argues that love is that foundational to existence. He writes that love is the, quote, reality of realities, the incomprehensibly glorious truth of truths that lives and breathes at the core of everything that exists.
This is a massive paradigm shift. If you truly internalize the idea that the universe isn't just cold, empty space filled with random floating rocks, but is actually a conscious, interconnected web woven together by love, it completely changes how you operate on a normal Tuesday afternoon. Think about our daily lives here in the States. We can be so hyper-individualistic. We're quick to feel road rage on the interstate or brush past people on the sidewalk, viewing ourselves as entirely separate from our neighbors. But if every particle in the universe is intimately connected, as Dr. Alexander experienced, then the way we treat the cashier at the grocery store takes on a cosmic weight. Showing grace isn't just a polite moral thing to do, it is literally aligning yourself with the fundamental physics of the universe. When you hurt someone else, you are quite literally hurting a part of the whole. And when you show love, you are acting as a direct conduit for the very energy that sustains existence. It's an incredibly beautiful, unifying vision of reality. But, of course, there is a giant skeptical elephant in the room.
Because while this journey through the gateway and into the infinite blackness of the core sounds profoundly moving, we have to remember where Dr. Alexander's physical body was during all of this. He was lying in an ICU bed, his neocortex completely offline, actively flooded with pus from a severe E. coli infection. And that harsh medical reality brings us to one of the most hotly debated aspects of his entire story, a medical mystery that directly confronts what modern science calls the hard problem of consciousness.
This hard problem is something philosophers and neuroscientists have been wrestling with for decades. The problem, simply put, is this: how does a physical clump of tissue, the gray matter in our skulls, produce the rich, subjective feeling of being alive? How do firing neurons create the vivid experience of seeing the color red, or feeling the warmth of the sun, or falling in love? In the medical world, the prevailing materialistic view is that the brain is the machine that produces consciousness, like a generator producing electricity. If you pull the plug, or the machine breaks, the lights go out. The show is over.
But Dr. Alexander's case completely shatters that assumption. We really need to look at the strict medical impossibility of what happened to him. He didn't just have a mild concussion or a temporary lapse in heartbeat where the brain was momentarily deprived of oxygen. He was suffering from a phenomenally rare, incredibly aggressive case of gram-negative E. coli meningitis. The bacteria had actively invaded his brain and spinal fluid. For 7 straight days, he was in a deep coma. His medical charts, his lab results, his scans, they all told the exact same grim story. His neocortex, the outer surface of the brain that makes us human, the part responsible for logic, sensory perception, and conscious thought, was completely offline. It wasn't just working poorly, it was essentially absent.
His brain was literally soaking in pus. Medically speaking, there was zero hardware available to generate a hallucination, let alone a hyper-vivid, lucid journey through multiple dimensions. If the brain produces consciousness, Dr. Alexander should have experienced absolutely nothing, just a vast, dreamless void, a total, inescapable blackout.
Yet, his experience was the exact opposite. While his physical brain was being actively destroyed by bacteria in an ICU bed, his consciousness was more expansive, more alert, and more brilliantly aware than at any other point in his entire life. He describes the thoughts he had in the core not as sluggish or foggy, but as pure, instantaneous conceptual flow. The reality of that dimension felt far more real than the physical world we are sitting in right now. This is the ultimate paradox, the undeniable reality that directly confronts the hard problem of consciousness. If a man with a fundamentally destroyed neocortex can have the most profoundly complex and hyper-lucid experience imaginable, then consciousness cannot possibly be a mere byproduct of brain chemistry.
It suggests something entirely revolutionary. It proves that we are conscious in spite of our physical brains, not because of them. Think about it like a television set. The brain isn't the broadcaster creating the signal, it's just the receiver picking it up. When Dr. Alexander's physical receiver was smashed by meningitis, the signal didn't stop. In fact, without the physical limitations of the earthly brain holding it back, the signal became infinitely clearer. The biological filter was removed. He experienced consciousness in its pure, unadulterated form.
And that realization completely flips our modern understanding of life and death upside down. Because if consciousness exists independently of the brain, then the physical death of our bodies isn't an ending at all. It's just a transition. And if we truly embrace that, if we actually start living our daily lives here on Earth with the active knowledge that our consciousness is eternal, well, that changes absolutely everything about how we walk through this world.
Think about how much of our daily human behavior is driven by a subtle, underlying fear of our own mortality. We hustle, we hoard, we build these giant defensive walls around our egos. As Dr. Alexander beautifully points out in the book, physical life is deeply characterized by defensiveness, whereas spiritual life is just the opposite.
When you truly internalize the reality that your consciousness is eternal, that your physical body is just a temporary spacesuit for your soul, the fear of death just evaporates. And when that fundamental fear of death evaporates, so does the desperate need to validate your existence through wealth or status or climbing the corporate ladder. You stop living defensively. You realize that you don't have to fiercely protect this fragile, finite identity, because your truest self is already completely free. Dr. Alexander brought back one central, overriding message from his journey, a truth he received while deep in the core of that spiritual realm. It was communicated without a single physical sound, but the profound meaning was unmistakable. He was told, "You are loved and cherished. You have nothing to fear. There is nothing you can do wrong."
He writes that if he had to boil the entire experience down to one single word, it would simply be love. Not the abstract Hallmark card version of love that we so often settle for here on Earth, but a fierce, unconditional, unimaginably powerful love that literally forms the very fabric of the universe. And that brings us to the most practical takeaway of this entire story, the ultimate reality of our interconnectedness. We are not just isolated biological machines bumping into each other on a pale blue dot in the middle of a cold vacuum. We are all deeply, intricately connected through a shared consciousness, like individual threads woven into a massive spiritual tapestry.
When you wake up every single morning with that active knowledge, it completely transforms how you treat people. It reframes your personal struggles too, because even the intense hardships, the illnesses, the heartbreaks, they are no longer just random, cruel punishments from an indifferent universe. They become profound opportunities for the growth of our souls. In the end, Proof of Heaven isn't just a book about dying. It's a blueprint for how to actually live. It's an invitation to drop the heavy armor we carry around, to recognize the divine spark in the person sitting next to you in traffic, and to live with the radical, unshakable peace of knowing that you are eternally held by an infinite source of love. If you want to dive deeper into Dr. Alexander's incredible journey and explore these mind-bending concepts for yourself, the link of the hard book is at the description. I highly, highly recommend picking it up. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Last Read, Books for Your Ears, Wisdom for Your Life. If this conversation sparks something inside you today, please make sure to subscribe so we can keep going on these journeys together.
Next time, we'll be shifting gears to explore the fascinating world of human habits, looking at the hidden psychology behind why we do what we do, and how we can finally rewire our daily routines. You definitely won't want to miss that one. But before we sign off today, I really want to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. What do you think happens after we take our final breath? Thank you again for listening. Stay curious, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.